Hello everyone, and welcome back. What is unfolding around Deanna, Joey, Vanessa, and the shadow of Doug's death no longer feels like simple family grief. It feels like the moment when old pain stops staying buried, and long-hidden questions begin to rise with enough force to tear through everything this family has tried to hold together. There are families that do not collapse at the exact moment tragedy strikes. They only begin to crack afterward, when the crying has stopped, when the crowd has gone home, when the words of comfort grow thin, and the truth quietly returns to collect its debt. The McBride family is standing exactly at that threshold now. Doug is dead, but his death does not rest like a sealed ending. It still exists as an emptiness that has not been filled, like a fracture stretching beneath the floorboards, where every step Vanessa takes, every look from Deanna, every appearance Joey makes causes the ground to tremble a little more. What makes all of this so dangerous is not only the pain of loss, but the growing sense that behind that death are timelines that do not match, emotions that came too early, relationships that were named too late, and explanations that only become more unsettling the more they are spoken. In a world like Fairmont Crest, people are rarely destroyed by one clear piece of evidence right away. They are destroyed by suspicion when it clings to the mind, by small details that refuse to stay still, and by questions that seem simple on the surface but cut deeper than any direct accusation. Deanna walked into the casino not like an impulsive daughter looking to make a scene, but like someone who had gone too far into grief to still fear what she might hear. Everything around Joey was still elegant, polished, and controlled by that calm composure he always used to make other people feel as though they were the ones overreacting. But this time, what Deanna brought with her was not a burst of anger. It was a chain of suspicions that had been left to sharpen long enough to become a blade. She told Joey to stay away from her mother, and on the surface it sounded like nothing more than the instinctive reaction of a daughter trying to protect her family. But in truth it was the opening declaration of a confrontation in which the man being questioned was no longer allowed to hide behind politeness. Joey chose to strike back in his usual calm tone. He told Deanna that her family's pain did not give her the right to interfere in Vanessa's life. He even shifted the argument into the language of emotion, as if the only issue here was a daughter who could not accept that her mother was moving on. It was a clever tactic, turning suspicion into emotion, turning a moral concern into a private matter, turning the possibility of betrayal into a story about a heart that could not be controlled. But that very smoothness only exposed Joey more clearly. A man who is truly innocent usually rushes to speak about the truth. A man who is too used to controlling the situation usually speaks about the right to love. Deanna did not fall into that trap. When Joey asked how she would feel if Vanessa interfered in her own relationships, Deanna immediately dragged the conversation back to where it belonged. The difference between the boys she had dated and Joey was not age or circumstance. It was the scent of danger Joey carried with him. Young people like Deanna may not have much power, but they are still sharp enough to recognize when an older man with influence, layers of protection, and a talent for saying exactly the right thing at exactly the right time is trying to shape the story in his favor. Joey said he loved everything about Vanessa, from her intelligence to her strength, speaking as though he were praising an extraordinary woman, as though his feelings were pure and uplifting. But that was exactly where the contradiction began to show. A pure love does not need to appear in the shadows of the past. A sincere relationship does not need to make a woman's daughter walk into a casino with the look of someone staring directly at the burial place of her family's last remaining honor. The more Joey tried to describe himself as a man who cherished Vanessa, the more Deanna felt that he was using her mother's qualities as a justification for his presence rather than explaining why he had been so close to this family at a time when he should never have had the right to step inside it. That was why Deanna began tightening the confrontation around time, not feelings. Not broad declarations about love, only time. She asked Joey when he had met Vanessa how many times they had met privately before Doug died, why his name had appeared in her mother's trip on the very day Doug died, Why, if there had been nothing improper between them, everything had been kept hidden? This was the point where the scene shifted from family conflict into a dissection of logic. Because when pain grows large enough, people often stop trusting instinct alone. They begin clinging to the order of events, to dates, to spans of time, to where someone was and what they knew. That was how Deanna protected herself from being dismissed as just a girl acting out because she had lost her father. She did not want to be only the grieving daughter. She wanted to be the person who saw where the story had been stitched back together badly. Each of her questions was not only meant to force Joey to answer, but to peel away the layers of smooth language he had long used like a weapon. The question, "Did my father know about the two of you?" was not merely about an affair. It cut straight into the cruelest obsession of all, whether Doug had left this life already betrayed, already abandoned, already turned into an outsider inside his own family. On a deeper level, Deanna was not only trying to find out who Joey was. She wanted to know who her mother had become after her father's death. And that was the true tragedy that made this scene suffocating. Because if Joey was an opportunist, that was disgusting enough. But if Vanessa had opened the door for him while Doug had not truly left this marriage yet, then for Deanna the world would be overturned in a far more devastating way. From the beginning, Vanessa had tried to frame the story through sympathy. She was suffering. She was lonely. She was exhausted by the burden, by Doug's addiction, by the years of carrying a man who no longer had control of himself. That argument was not unreasonable. In fact, it was dangerous precisely because it made sense. No one lives with an addict without being worn down. No woman left alone inside a long failing marriage escapes the slow death that begins long before her husband physically dies. But that is exactly why the moral line becomes more blurred and more frightening. A person can be both a victim and still make a terrible mistake. A person can be sincerely hurting and still take one wrong step that tears their children apart. And Deanna sensed that her mother was standing right inside that gray zone, where every excuse becomes more humane and yet, if betrayal exists, more painful at the same time. Joey understood that, so he did not answer like a man cornered. He chose to speak about the future, about proving who he really was, about how Deanna had nothing to fear. But promises are always the tools of people who cannot control the past. A person who holds the truth in his hands does not need to ask for more time to prove himself. Only someone who knows that the most dangerous thing lies in what has already happened tries to drag the other person into the territory of future assurances. Here, Joey revealed something very clearly. He did not only want to keep Vanessa. He wanted to be accepted as someone who had the right to remain inside this broken family without being questioned. That was emotional ambition colored by possession. He did not only want Vanessa's love. He wanted its legitimacy. He wanted Deanna to accept it. He wanted the pain of the McBride family to be rearranged so that his presence would appear inevitable, even redemptive. That is what made Deanna's question turn colder than ever when she asked whether he truly loved her mother, or whether he had simply waited for her family to fall apart so he could step in. This was no longer a question about timing, it was a question about nature. And nature is always more frightening than behavior, because behavior can be explained, while nature cannot. What makes this scene hurt even more is not whether Deanna has proof yet, but the feeling she carries inside her, the feeling so many children have when they lose a father too suddenly. The feeling that she missed a sign, failed to protect him, failed to see how lonely he was as he was dying. So when she asked, "Where were you that night?" And "Where was my mother when my father needed her most?" Those were no longer questions directed only at Joey or Vanessa. They were sobs forced into the shape of accusations. Deanna was reconstructing the night her father died like a psychological crime scene. She needed to place everyone exactly where they belonged, not only to find the truth, but to punish herself a little less. If someone else had failed Doug too, if someone else had looked away from him, then perhaps her guilt would lose some of its self-destructive shape. But the cruel irony is that this journey pushes her even farther away from her mother. Because the more pieces she puts together, the more Vanessa stops looking like a woman simply grieving beside her husband's portrait and starts looking like someone who may already have been living in another emotional orbit before Doug finally fell. That is why Vanessa becomes the most tragic figure at the center of this storm. Not because she is completely innocent, but because she may also not be cruel enough to survive all the consequences of what she did or failed to stop. She loved Doug in the way people love the past, which is to say she loved the man he once was, the man with whom she once built a life. But living with someone sinking into addiction and losing control may have distorted that love into duty, pity, exhaustion, and at times the desperate need to be seen by someone else. Joey entered through that crack, not as the first storm, but as the water slipping through a fracture that already existed. That is what allows Vanessa to justify herself while still making it impossible for her to look her daughter in the eye when asked when it all began. Because if she admitted that Joey had been present earlier than she claimed, then she would have to face the possibility that Doug was not the only one who had left the marriage first. She had too. And if she had already left in her heart, then the day Doug died would no longer be only a tragedy. It would become the day her guilt had a chance to turn into something she could no longer name. That is why Vanessa resists, avoids, denies, and then continues to unravel after realizing she has recently been outmaneuvered by someone else. This woman is losing control on two fronts at once, outwardly in the moves being made by Joey and the people around her, and inwardly in the memories that no longer stay still according to the version she wants to tell. Viewed through a more analytical lens, Deanna is doing what no one else in the family dares to do. She is refusing to accept the blank spaces wrapped in politeness. Donald may choose to protect his mother because he cannot bear to lose another family member after Doug. Vanessa chooses silence because the truth could completely destroy what remains of her life. Joey chooses gentleness because it is the only way to preserve the image of a trustworthy man. But Deanna has no remaining interest in keeping the peace. The person who loses the most in family stories is often also the only one willing to dirty her hands and drag the corpse of the truth into the light. She is sharp not because she is heartless, but because she hurts too much. She is ruthless not because she wants to destroy her mother, but because she cannot keep living if she must call a lie healing. And that is where BTG is placing her in an incredibly powerful position. Deanna is not merely the rebellious daughter objecting to her mother's new relationship. She is becoming the uncomfortable conscience of the entire storyline, the person forcing every other character to pay for the things they thought time could bury. The true climax of this confrontation does not lie in whether Deanna asked if Joey and Vanessa betrayed Doug. It lies in the final question. When every layer of meaning narrows into a single sharp point, was my father's death really an accident, or was it the most convenient outcome for the two of you? That is the cruelest question of all because it does not need to make a direct accusation in order to bring a horrifying possibility into view. It turns love into motive. It turns a perfectly timed appearance into something suspicious. It turns Joey's gentleness into strategy. It turns Vanessa's tears into something that can be reconsidered under a different light. And from that moment on, none of them can return to the old safe ground. Joey can keep denying it, Vanessa can keep avoiding it, but Deanna has already done the most important thing. She has changed the nature of the game. Before that question, this was a story about a widow facing her daughter's resistance as she tried to move on. After that question, it becomes a story about whether a family is being asked to swallow a betrayal painted over with sympathy. From here, the road ahead will almost certainly grow darker. Because once Deanna has dared to speak that question aloud, she will not be able to stop at suspicion. She will begin hunting for the timeline, the secret meetings, the traces inside that trip, the periods of silence, any detail that might prove her instincts are not delusions born from grief. Joey will be forced to decide whether he will continue playing the role of the patient man who loves Vanessa or let the more aggressive, controlling side beneath his calm surface finally show. Vanessa will be pushed to the final limit between protecting the man now standing beside her and saving the last fragments of trust still left in her daughter's eyes. And Doug's shadow will only grow larger, because in stories like this, the dead are never truly gone while a question about their death remains unanswered. And the most painful truth of all may be that none of them is entirely lying, but neither is any of them still innocent enough to say they had no part in any of it. That gray zone is what makes Fairmont Crest feel suffocating, not who pulled the trigger, but who opened the door for tragedy long before it ever came inside.